The call lasted 43 seconds. I counted, after, the way you count strange things when your mind refuses to hold the thing that just happened. 30 of those 43 seconds, my son spent explaining why he couldn't come home. When Gloria's attorney finally told me what she'd left behind, I was glad I was sitting down. Follow this to the end. What my wife did, what she built in secret over 9 years without saying a word to me, is something I'm still not sure I've fully understood. My name is Lester. I'm 63 years old, retired from the Postal Service after 38 years, and until about 8 months ago, I believed I had a reasonably clear picture of my own life. I knew my house, my town, my finances. I knew if my son, that was October. By December, I understood that I had been wrong about almost all of it. Gloria passed on the morning of October 14th. Pancreatic cancer. We'd known for 14 months, though the last 4 of those were the ones that counted. She handled it the way she handled everything, without making herself the center of the room, without asking for more than she needed. Right up until the final week, she was the one asking the hospice nurses how their shifts were going, whether they needed anything. That was Gloria. She spent 61 years on this earth, and I don't think she ever once walked into a room without making it a little warmer. I waited until 10 in the morning to call my son. I wanted to give myself enough time to collect my voice. He answered on the 3rd ring. I heard noise behind him, music, dishes, someone laughing somewhere in his Dallas apartment, the sounds of a regular morning. "Mason," I said, "I need to tell you something. Your mother passed away a few hours ago." The pause that followed was long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "God, Dad." His voice was flat in a way that didn't match the words. "I'm really sorry." "I need you to come home," I said. "There are arrangements to make." "When are you thinking?" "As soon as you can get here." Another pause. "Here's the thing." His voice shifted slightly, the way it does when he's moving into a different mode. "Camille has an investor presentation on Thursday. She's been working on it for months, and she really needs me there. And I've got 3 closings before the end of the week. Could the funeral home hold off on arrangements until next week? Just a few days?" I held the phone and didn't speak. In the background, I heard Camille's voice, bright, easy, calling his name. "I have to go," he said. "I'll call you tonight. I love you, Dad." He did not call that night. I planned the funeral by myself. The director at the funeral home, a patient man named Mr. Okafor, walked me through every decision without rushing me once, even when I lost my place in the middle of a sentence 3 different times. When he asked how many attendees to prepare for, I told him 40. Gloria had lived in Millhaven for 30 years. She'd volunteered at the food pantry every other Saturday. She'd taught Sunday school until her knees made it hard to stand for long stretches. I thought 40 was conservative. There were 22 people at the service. I counted because I had nothing else to do while the pastor spoke. Her friend from the food pantry, her old coworker from the library who drove 40 minutes in the rain, 3 neighbors, our mail carrier who hadn't known she was sick and cried harder than anyone else in the room. Mason was not there. He'd called the night before to tell me the investor meeting had run long, that the flights hadn't worked out, that he was thinking of me and would visit soon. I stood at the podium and talked about Gloria. I told them she'd learned to can tomatoes at 58 years old because she's always wanted to, that she remembered the names of every cashier at the grocery store and asked about their families, that she had loved Mason with a ferocity that never bent, even when he stopped calling on Sundays, even when Camille started referring to her as your dad's wife, in conversations she thought I couldn't hear. I did not mention that he wasn't there. The empty rows said it clearly enough. At the graveside, Mrs. Petty from next door held my arm while they lowered the casket. The November wind was cold enough to hurt. I kept my eyes forward because I knew that if I looked at the space where my son should have been standing, I would not keep it together. She squeezed my arm and said, "One of the real ones, Lester." She was one of the real ones. That evening, Mason called. "How'd it go?" he asked. I stood in the kitchen, with the phone pressed to my ear, and tried to find words that wouldn't sound like what they were. "Your mother was buried today," I said. "I know, and I'm sorry, I really am. But you know, Mom, she wouldn't have wanted me to upend everything. She would have wanted her son at her funeral." "Dad." His voice took on a tone that had been appearing more and more over the last few years. Patient, careful, slightly condescending. "I think you need some time. We'll talk when things settle down." He hung up. I turned off the lights and sat in the dark for a while. Gloria's reading glasses were still on the end table beside her chair. I hadn't touched them. The 2 weeks that followed were the kind you get through rather than experience. I answered condolence cards. I brought the neighbors' casserole dishes back to their doors. I washed Gloria's clothes and folded them and stacked them on the foot of the bed and couldn't make myself do anything else with them. Mason texted twice. Both messages said some version of thinking of you. Then 17 days after the funeral, a woman named Iris Beaumont called my house. She identified herself as an estate attorney in Columbus, said she'd been retained by my wife, and asked if I could come in at my earliest convenience. I told her there must be a mistake. Gloria and I had a joint checking account, a savings account we'd built slowly over the years, the house, and 2 trucks. We were not the kind of people who had estate attorneys. I drove to Columbus on a Tuesday anyway. Iris Beaumont was a composed woman in her 50s with the steady manner of someone who regularly tells people news that reorganizes their lives. She waited until I was seated and then she opened a folder. Gloria's aunt had passed in 2015 and left her 47 acres of farmland in central Ohio. Instead of selling it, which is what I had believed happened, because Gloria had told me the estate was resolved, she had leased it to an agricultural company. The lease payments had been depositing into a separate account for 9 years. With Iris's guidance, she'd invested that money carefully over time. The total value of all assets, including the farmland and the investment accounts, was just under $900,000. I asked Iris to repeat the number. She did. She kept detailed notes, Iris said. She wrote that she didn't want you to feel pressure to retire before you were ready. She also wrote, Iris looked down at the page, that she wanted to make sure you would never have to be dependent on anyone. She was specifically concerned about Mason's situation. Mason's situation, I repeated. She had retained a private investigator about 18 months ago. His name is Darnell Coffey. What he found is part of the file, and you should read it before you make any decisions. I sat in that office for another hour and a half. By the time I left, I understood that my wife had spent 9 years quietly building a wall around me. She'd done it so carefully that I'd never noticed the construction. My phone rang in the parking garage, Mason's name on the screen. He hadn't called voluntarily in almost 3 weeks. He was calling now, at 4:15 on a Tuesday afternoon, 40 minutes after I'd walked out of an estate attorney's office in Columbus. Dad, hey. His voice was warmer than it had been in years. I've been thinking about you so much lately. How are you holding up? Managing, I said. Listen, Camille and I have been talking. We feel terrible about everything. We really want to make this right. We think you should come stay with us in Dallas for a while, just to get out of that house, change the scenery. How did you find out? I asked. Find out what? About the estate. A pause. I don't know what you mean. I'm worried about you, Dad. Mason, I just came from a meeting with your mother's attorney. Who told you? Another pause, longer. One of Mom's friends might have mentioned something. I don't exactly remember. He was lying. I'd listened to that voice for 35 years and I knew every register of it. I'll talk to you later, I said. I didn't call him later. 3 days passed. Then Mason and Camille flew in from Dallas without asking. Mason texted the night before to say they'd booked flights and would arrive at noon. Through the living room window, I watched their white rental SUV sit in the driveway for almost 10 minutes before they got out. I could see Camille talking with her hands, Mason nodding in that slow, careful way he'd developed over the last 5 years. When I opened the door, Mason hugged me with both arms. The hug lasted exactly long enough to seem genuine without being long enough to feel real. Dad. He pulled back and studied my face with manufactured concern. You look tired. Camille stepped forward and took my hand in both of hers. Lester, we are so sorry about Gloria. She was such a special woman. It was the first time in 5 years of marriage to my son that Camille had called my wife by her first name. They came inside. Camille's eyes moved across the room in a single smooth pass. Gloria's mother's china cabinet, my father's roll-top desk, the framed prints we'd collected at flea markets over the years. I recognized the look. I'd seen it at estate sales. At the kitchen table, they laid out their concern piece by piece. I was too isolated out here. Ohio winters were harsh. They'd researched senior living communities near Dallas. Mason could help manage the finances. Camille knew a financial advisor who specialized in retirees. What exactly are you worried about me managing? I asked. They exchanged a look. There's a specific look that passes between two people who have coordinated a plan and are checking in with each other mid-execution. That was the look. Grief affects judgment, Camille said, leaning forward with an expression she wanted me to read as compassion. We've read about it. People make decisions in the months after a loss that they later regret. We want to protect you. Protect me from what? From yourself, Mason said. Then he caught himself. I mean, from impulsive decisions. And honestly, Dad, this house needs work. The roof, the furnace. It's a lot for one person. I've been managing it for 30 years. You had Mom then. The kitchen went quiet. I looked at my son sitting in the chair he'd sat in every morning of his childhood, and tried to find the boy who used to fall asleep on the couch watching baseball with me in the summer. He was in there somewhere, I had to believe that. But Camille had been working on him for a long time. Here is what Darnell Coffey had found about Camille. A restraining order filed against her in Nevada, under a different last name. A probate dispute in Arizona involving an elderly widower whose children accused his companion, Camille, using yet another name variation, of pressuring him into changing his estate documents shortly before his death. The Arizona case had been settled out of court. There was a third file from a county in New Mexico that Darnell had turned up in the week before her arrival. 3 states, 3 men, 2 had died. 1 had survived after his children intervened in time. Camille had done this before. She had found Mason the way a person finds a specific tool for a specific job. And what made it harder was that Mason probably believed, genuinely believed, that he was there because he was worried about his father. That's how patient she had been. Careful enough that he couldn't feel where his own feelings ended, and her engineering began. I stood up from the table. I'd like you both to leave, I said. Mason blinked. Dad, we just got here. I know. I'd like you to go. Camille's smile stayed exactly where it was. Lester, we're family. We're not trying to upset you. And I'm asking family to respect what I'm saying. They drove away. I called Iris Beaumont. She already knew they were in town. She'd been expecting my call. Gloria's will had conditions built into it. Specific, legal, airtight. If Mason or anyone acting on his behalf attempted to establish power of attorney through coercion, attempted to have me declared mentally incompetent without documented medical grounds, or attempted to pressure me into liquidating assets, Mason's inheritance transferred entirely to a charitable trust. Nothing for him, not a dollar. There's something else, Iris said. Darnell Coffey has been in contact with the Elder Financial Exploitation Unit at the Ohio AG's office. Given Camille's documented history and what's happening now, there may be grounds for a formal investigation. They came back 3 days later. Mason called ahead this time, asked if they could talk. I said yes, but when they pulled into the driveway, a second car pulled in behind them. A man I didn't recognize got out, late 40s, dark suit, soft leather briefcase. He introduced himself as a family advocate and financial wellness consultant that Mason had hired to help facilitate a transition plan. I let them all in. I listened for 20 minutes while the consultant used phrases like cognitive load of financial management and age-appropriate support structures. He had a brochure for a senior living community near Fort Worth. He said the house could be sold and the proceeds directed toward my care, while Mason oversaw my accounts. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. Iris Beaumont came through the front door first, followed by Darnell Coffey. Behind them was a woman I hadn't met before who identified herself as Special Agent Yvonne Park from the Ohio Attorney General's Elder Financial Exploitation Unit. The consultant's composure broke somewhere around the moment Agent Park showed her badge. Camille stood very still. Iris opened the folder she'd brought and laid the documents on the kitchen table. Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, photographs, court records, case numbers. Camille looked at the papers the way you look at something you have been pretending doesn't exist. Camille, Agent Park said, I'm asking you to come with me voluntarily to answer some questions. You're not under arrest at this moment. But there is an active investigation, and I'd like you to cooperate. Mason was standing near the wall. I watched him look from the photographs to his wife and back again. The color had left his face entirely. Mason, I said, I need to ask you something. Think carefully before you answer. He looked at me. When did Camille ever ask about your mother? Before the illness? Before any of this? When did she ever want to know how Gloria was doing, what she was thinking, what she needed? His jaw moved, nothing came out. When did she ever ask about me that way? Before she found out about the estate. The silence that followed lasted long enough to be its own kind of answer. The consultant left quickly, mentioning a prior obligation. Agent Park and Darnell drove Camille to the Columbus field office. She gave a voluntary statement that afternoon. The formal charges came 6 weeks later. Elder fraud and conspiracy, with an extradition request pending from Arizona. After they all left, Mason sat at the kitchen table and didn't move for a long time. "I didn't know," he finally said. "I know you didn't." "How much did you know before today?" "Enough. Your mother made sure of that." He pressed both hands flat on the table. He'd done that since he was small, pressing his palms down when he was trying to hold himself together. "I missed her funeral." He stopped. "Tried again. I can't take that back." "No," I said, "you can't." "Is there anything I can do?" I thought about what Iris had read to me from Gloria's notes, the instructions about what to do if Mason came back out of love versus what to do if he came back out of greed. The door she'd left open for him, narrow, with conditions, because she had loved him steadily and without apology even while she was building a legal case against what he'd become. "There's something you can do," I said, "but it's going to take time, and it's going to take you doing the actual work, not for the money. Not because of any of that, because I'd like to know my son again while I still can." He nodded. He was crying quietly in the way men our age sometimes do when we're trying not to. I got up and made coffee. We sat at that table until nearly midnight. He told me things I'd suspected and things I hadn't. About how Camille had separated him from his old friends, one by one, always with a reasonable explanation. About how she managed their joint accounts in ways that kept him financially dependent on her approval. About the way she'd framed his parents over years as people who held him back, unsophisticated, limited, embarrassing, until he'd half believed it without realizing he'd been led there. I listened without interrupting. That's something Gloria taught me early in our marriage. Sometimes staying in the room is the whole thing. Mason is back in Ohio now. He's renting an apartment in Columbus about 35 minutes from the house. He found a position with a real estate firm downtown. He comes for dinner on Sundays. Not every Sunday, but most. He doesn't ask about the estate. He doesn't mention money at all. He brought me a plant last month because I'd mentioned once, years ago, that I'd been meaning to put something green in the front window. He remembered that. I don't know how, but he remembered. The investigation is still moving forward. Agent Park tells me the cooperation from Arizona may complicate things on the timeline, but not on the outcome. I still live in the house. The furnace works fine. The roof has a few years left in it. There are mornings that are very hard. I reach across the bed for Gloria out of habit, and the habit is older than almost anything else I know, and finding only the blanket is a specific kind of pain I don't think ever fully leaves you. But there are also Sunday dinners now. And a plant in the window that I've somehow managed not to kill, and a son who is slowly becoming someone I recognize again, which I had not let myself believe was possible. Gloria knew. She saw all of this coming years before I did. And she didn't panic, and she didn't ask me to carry the worry with her. She just quietly built something strong enough to hold us both. Not because she thought I couldn't handle it. Because she loved me, and that's what love does when it's the real kind. It makes plans. It takes the long view. It works in the background so you don't have to be afraid. I think about that every morning when I water that plant by the window. She couldn't be here for the part where things got better. But she made the part where things got better possible. That's who she was. That's who she'll always be.